every board, every management team right now is thinking about their supply chain. Probably not the way that we think about supply chains, but they're thinking about it, right? Tariffs have now changed the way everyone is thinking about where things come from. And it's interesting because supply chains have had a kind of big last 5 years. COVID made people think about supply chains, went away. Laws came, people started thinking about it, went away. Does it feel like now with the tariff and trade focus that it's going to be impossible to think about a business going forward without thinking about how the supply chain's structured? Can you give me a little bit of sense of like where we are in like the sea change around awareness of challenges and how supply chains snake through the world?
So resilience is all about relationships.
Mm.
And relationships are strongest when they're based on integrity and transparency, when they're based on trust. So, in these circumstances, resilience comes from visibility in relationships. What we see amongst our clients is they're bracing themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Sustainability teams understand that this is a dark moment for human rights in the sense that when supply chains need to change quickly, when there's a kind of high pace of change, relationships are compromised in a big way, and you don't have the kind of long history, deep knowledge of one another anymore. You often kind of suddenly partnering up with trading partners you don't know, you don't understand the legal
Sure.
context. Everyone's sprinting in the dark. So essentially, what I see is sustainability teams who understand that they'll have to become even more savvy about how they
Yeah.
conduct due diligence with these new trading partners. That's going to be
Yeah. And
a
can this be a reset? I mean, with the shock and awe, to borrow an old term, of how supply chains are going to be reset for folks that work in responsible supply chains, the old parlance of the way you talk about things will need to change. And it seems like supply chains are going to be scrutinized. Choices are going to be scrutinized much more based on resilience and durability. And the hopeaholic in me believes that inside of that can be the argument of human rights is part of sustainability, is part of durability, is part of resilience. And if you miss that box, yeah, I mean, why can't you just make that part of the decision tree?
Why do the front-running brands with mature due diligence systems take an interest in human rights along their supply chain? Because viable businesses treat their people right.
Hmm.
Viable, reliable trading partners don't need to rely on forced labor to run a business. So as soon as you have those elements in your supply chain, it's fragile. The minute there's a pandemic or a change,
Yeah.
it's going to be fragile.
Well, you talk about how there are two reasons why companies do sustainability due diligence, the monitoring, addressing of impacts on people and planet, purely to comply, which is external regulatory, and the other is to protect their supply chain and brand, strategic driver. Can you say a little bit more about those two reasons and can they play together?
These companies who fall under the pure compliance category are companies who will search for certifications where there's the biggest interval in terms of time or the longest expiry date. So this is a certification process that'll happen every 1 to 5 years. And that's enough. That'll be enough because it'll
Oh
check
yeah,
the box. So it's all
yeah,
about box checking.
yeah, I
It's
know.
not about taking it seriously because they don't see it as a strategic risk to the supply chain or their business.
Yep.
But then the other bunch see human rights as a strategic risk, human
Yep.
rights as either a strengthener or a risk to
Yep.
their supply chain and business. And so they get going with infrastructure. C-level gets it. It's part of risk management. It's non-financial risk management.
Well, I mean, I've heard you also say that there's the term like due diligence has a negative association, and I'm I'm a word person. I like words. I believe that words make worlds, and I believe that we sometimes words become our little darlings, and we want to hold on to terms that we've grown up with or studied under or built a career around. And what I think we forget is that words sometimes have a past due date. And we don't know how to reinterpret or re-explain what we're trying to achieve in the world. And when you hear due diligence, it does sound like something's wrong, or that you've got it. It sounds like going and taking a test, and instead of fixing something or improving or optimizing. I mean, imagine if you just completely got rid of due diligence and called it optimizing.
Yeah, I love that. Actually, I can't help but notice that often when it comes to social justice and human rights, we like to steal vocabulary from the finance sector.
Hmm.
So we like to pull frameworks and vernacular from the finance sector because we think then people will take it seriously and fund the
Yeah.
shit out of it. So um, but actually, the tricky bit with the concept of due diligence, and I have huge respect for it, and I absolutely think we need regulation in place
Hmm.
to insist on it. However, the cultural pitfall with due diligence is that it comes from the financial and transactional world where it's all about finding and not fixing, exactly as you said. What frustrates me about about the focus on due diligence is it's all gloom. It's
Yeah.
this notion that all we're doing is chasing the identification of risk, and if we've if we've detected the risk and there's some action plan in place, usually entirely the responsibility of the supplier to fix the problem,
Yeah.
then we've checked those two boxes and it's done, and we communicate our little log of number of issues detected and number of caps in place, and then we sort it. My frustration is, hey, it's not just gloom. That intelligence process, that listening process needs to pick up the good stuff, needs to pick up improvements
Yep.
and progress, because that's what should get everyone excited, because we get what we focus on. Let's focus on improvement. And let's inject some new language in here that also includes improvement and also includes, shared responsibility by buyers and suppliers in
Mm.
generating strain that affects workers.
Somehow there's this idea that when you buy services or data from companies like ours, that somehow you have to hold on to it and you're in control of it. Why aren't companies sharing this information freely, opening it up to their suppliers to help them run their businesses, not as a stick, but as a carrot? What's in the psychology around just like my data, my problems? I'm going to hold on to it. I pay for it.
I think it comes from the arrogance that's wired into the architecture of a global supply chain. I
Hmm.
think the imbalance of power is that the one who pays the bill stipulates how the rules work,
Hmm.
and intel and information is power. So there's a little bit of an assumption that the visibility needs to come to us. We need to have this vantage point. We'll tell you what you need to know. And I think it doesn't serve the supply chain.
No.
It doesn't serve the supply chain to have the control tower staffed by half of the professionals who need to be in there. A supply chain is a joint venture. There's a whole lot of contextual factors that explain impacts along a supply chain, not merely an employer. Also the buyer and purchasing practices are in the mix. So it's a joint venture. You jointly form and shape the circumstances that apply. Therefore, intel about that supply chain should entirely be shared. Software platforms should be hardwired to ensure that data is shared.
Hmm.
And that's what sets the whole relationship up for success when the shit starts to hit the fan, when things
Yep.
get hard. If you're both singing off the same song sheet, you know that there's a challenge. It's been coming for a while. You've already been chatting about it every now and again. Then you're ready. You're
Yep.
ready.
The whole point of this show is to help those that are working in this space to optimize their work, to improve, to learn soft diplomacy skills, to really learn how to be a contributor to the business. So given the, shock and awe and chaos theory of the tariffs that we're living under, what advice would you give to supply chain managers who still need to do the work to comply with these laws, of which there's dozens of supply chain regulatory laws around the world, including CSDDD?
Don't do this because of regulation. If you do it in a thoughtful manner, and you go for the systems and infrastructure approach rather than the reactive pure compliance approach, then you'll be in the situation you need to be to handle this period of deep uncertainty. Secondly, look after your relationships. In this period of uncertainty, ensure that your communication with your suppliers is respectful. Don't squeeze them too hard in this period. Don't turn up the pressure. It's not going to serve you well, in the storm. Thirdly, be proactive in your priority areas. Turn the lights on and stay close to those suppliers in the areas that are considered higher human rights risk. Areas in the supply chain, sourcing geographies, particular activities associated with higher human rights risk. Have the additional measures in place. Use good data and tech, to help you here.
That is fantastic guidance, and I couldn't agree with you more. It seems like this is an incredible time for buyers and sellers to learn new collaboration skills, learn the value of their trust and increase their trust. Lea, thank you so much for coming on the show. I hope you can come back on. You're a wealth of knowledge, and you are clearly one of the most fascinating and heartfelt or heart-led guests that we've had here. So keep going, keep being a hopeaholic.
Oh, thank you, Justin. And thank you also, a little shout out to our friend Bora, yourself.
Oh, yes.
Connecting us. But it's really been a privilege. I love listening to your podcast. You're such a wordsmith and such a kind of generous host. So thanks for giving that to me today.
I'll make sure that finds its way into the edit.